Good morning, everybody. It's the March 22nd meeting of the Infrastructure Committee, and if it were like 4 degrees cooler, it'd probably have trudged through the snow to get here. Good morning. So we're going to begin our agenda with a report from Ed, our Public Works Director. And when we get to the information items, I'd like to ask if we can just arrange it so we can have a discussion with the Environmental Advisory Commission Chair, Jesse Lytle, first, and then do the other 2 items. Okay with everybody?
Of course. Sure.
Because he has someplace to go. He may have to leave before we're finished. So thank you, Ed.
Good morning. Well, as you mentioned, we're transitioning from our snow operations over to spring, beginning to work on the fields, preparation for spring baseball and other activities. So we're starting field prep and playground preparations. We're still continuing to work on the borough signage, updating faded and old bent damaged signs. And we're doing some small tree pruning in the Narberth Park currently. And street sweeping has resumed again for this spring. That's all I have.
I have a question. Thank you for that. I noticed that the baseball field had been really beautifully lined. Was that our Public Works crew, or was it?
It's a combination of Public Works and Charles Frill.
Well, it looks like it's coming along.
Well, the
it's
rain
really in good shape.
Rain should help. We're hoping for some warmer weather next week.
Rain hopefully should stop sometime soon, right? 24 hours now?
Yes. So we're hoping for some dry period. The Baseball League is hoping to open on March 30th, which is next Saturday.
And I have another question about the field. I noticed that the field gets the main field on the playground field, that it gets some pretty rugged use towards the latter part of the fall, and it gets pretty brown by the time winter begins. How's it doing? How is it recovering through the winter, and how does it look to you, the turf?
Well, we did a soil test last year, and that came back pretty good as far as nutrient levels, so we didn't have to amend the soil very much. We did use an Earthworks fertilizer product this spring. Earthworks is an organic fertilizer with no herbicides or pesticides in it. And then we used a combination of fescue and ryegrass seed to put down over the field. So we put down about 1,000 pounds of seed.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. Well, the field is just over 50,000 square feet, so it's about the proper amount of seed for the coverage that we're hoping to get.
Thank you. Yeah, please, other questions?
And you mentioned that you were going to paint the crosswalks on Sealine and North Narberth. Is that still on the agenda for spring?
It's our first item.
So neighbors can anticipate this when we stop
Well,
raining?
the temperatures have to come up a little bit. It has to be at least above 50 degrees for a few days before we can do that.
Great, so it's a
But
spring
we have the
project.
paint, we have the machine,
Awesome.
and we're ready to go.
So the Montgomery Avenue intersection with North Narberth will be
And
have
Sabine.
crosswalks, and Sabine, the 5-point intersection there.
Right, so they
Yeah,
all
have
currently
crosswalks
have
on all.
crosswalks except for ours.
Okay, great.
Correct, and we were waiting for PECO, Gas Works. We ran
Great.
too late in the year last year, that's why we weren't able to get into that.
Great. Thank you.
Michelle? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate all you're doing. And we're glad you're not pushing snow around this morning.
I am as well.
Mr. Lytle, Jesse Lytle, the chair of the Environmental Advisory Council Commission, was generous enough to come this morning, and he's got several things on that he'd like to share with us. So Jesse, you want to just come on up to the table?
I would love that.
That'd be great. Maybe.
You want to take my seat here?
Oh, great. Yeah, you can.
All right.
That'd be great. Thank you. Came from a friend of mine in Seattle. I thought we should make one.
Good morning.
Good morning, Jesse. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah. Well, thanks for creating us.
Sounds odd.
You're welcome.
So I guess we have two potential business items. One is fairly discrete, which is the recommendation that we are relaying from the community, a resolution to commit to 100% renewable energy on a timeline. So that's one we can discuss. The other is a broader conversation about EAC's role, duties, and priorities. We've now met 3 times as an EAC, and we've spent most of that time just sort of chewing on that question. We had an open meeting with the community where we solicited various views. What would you like to see the EAC accomplish? Met with borough staff, met with many of you. We have our own charge. We have the emerging comprehensive plan. All of these offer suggestions about important work that could be done, and we would love your input in prioritizing, identifying what to put first, and try to determine whether we are structured in such a way that we can actually get the critical work done on any timeline that matters. So that is the big conversation.
Terrific. Well, why don't you begin by telling us about Ready for 100 and what that resolution really would commit the borough to?
Sure. So Ready for 100% Renewable is a nationwide program. It's under the auspices of the Sierra Club, in the absence of a federal government that is interested in these policy issues. The NGO community is stepping in. And this program has gained a lot of traction nationwide, but particularly here in Southeast Pennsylvania. So last night, Cheltenham Township became the 8th or 9th community in our part of the world to commit to transitioning away from fossil fuels towards renewable energy. Every community, every municipality makes its own resolution that fits its particular needs, but the structure is basically one that proposes a timeline, and generally it's decades out. So the one we're looking at is a 2050 commitment for switching all borough energy away from greenhouse gas emitting technologies, with an interim goal of 2035 for just the electricity footprint. So that's a long runway, understanding that energy markets are changing, technologies are changing. It does not commit the borough to any specific investments or technologies, but what it says is if we don't start planning, we're never going to get there. So we commit to planning for that future. And the term of art is a climate action plan. And so that would be a fairly comprehensive planning process around energy systems and basically all the things we do in our Earth that emit greenhouse gases, try to understand what we can do to mitigate those emissions, on a feasible timeline in a cost-effective way. So, line up strategies and start with the lowest hanging fruit. As you know, with energy projects, there's often a financial payback, at least for the lowest hanging fruit. So that's the obvious place to start. And then, as you work through it, you hope that technologies evolve such that it becomes more and more feasible and maybe even cost advantageous. But these are not easy transitions, which is why it's a multi-year process, and that's why this is just step one on a long journey.
So if we were to pass this resolution, what would the first action step be within the borough to say move towards the 2035 goal of being electric, carbon neutral electricity? Is
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the big first step is to begin a planning process. That doesn't mean we don't have to do. We can also, in parallel, begin to do work that we know we want to do. And so I suspect borough staff have ideas about certain specific projects. They might be the streetlights, they might be borough-owned properties where conducting an energy audit, switching electricity suppliers is an immediate step you can take. So you don't have to wait for the plan to be completed to take some initial steps like that. But I would say that's probably tier one, is those category of things. So the planning on one hand, and then looking just immediately at borough-controlled operations and figuring out what feasible and cost-effective first steps are.
Okay, so at this moment, everyone in the borough who purchases electricity from PECO has the option of buying, say, wind energy.
Correct.
So theoretically, we could accomplish that goal tomorrow if we
Household
were all,
by household.
household by household, if we were all to purchase wind energy,
Mhm.
and the borough would purchase wind energy or solar energy.
Yep.
Is that correct?
That is correct.
So we could be 2035, could be 2020 easily.
You could. And, yeah.
What is there? So I'm assuming that there are probably some percentage of residents that are going to be committed to continuing to use coal. How does the, well, I'm just asking.
No, quick question. I mean, is that actually is that actually the goal? The goal is to have
By
everybody,
2030.
individuals in
By
the borough, as well, or
2035.
just the borough government?
No, the whole community.
The whole
okay,
community, yeah,
individuals.
The whole
that's
community.
that's what the
That's a heavy
resolution
lift.
is. Yeah. So I'm assuming that there are probably some people within the borough who are really committed to continuing to use coal, like they believe in that. So how does our policy impact them?
Sure. Well, so that's the current Pennsylvania electricity market. I would not assume it's going to stay that way a decade from now, for multiple reasons. One is there are many communities pushing back against restrictions on communities doing like community solar projects and things like that. So there are ways to enable communities to work together to choose different fuel sources. The other is the economics, and that is the reality is existing coal plants are cheap. They're going to be more and more expensive. New coal plants are ridiculously expensive, especially compared to renewables. So the financial forces behind this, the markets will drive movement towards renewable. The only issue is speed. And speed is one thing we don't have. If you've read the IPCC report that says we have about 12 years to drastically reduce fossil fuel consumption before we basically locked ourselves into a downward spiral that questions the continuation of civilization as we know it. Not to be overly dire, but that's what's on the table. So it's a speed question, and that's why this is a grassroots effort that's happening nationwide, sending signals to the market from around the country. The idea is not to compel any residents to move in a direction they're not ready to move in, but to start to move systems in such a way that this is sort of an obvious, financially viable direction. Even if you love coal, you're probably against breathing coal pollution. So
Sure.
I mean,
And I just have one other question that dovetails into kind of our priorities, and then give each of the other committee members a chance to ask questions too. Is the EAC, does the EAC have the capacity, and are you willing to, and have you thought about how you might begin to educate the residents of the borough on the kind of how to achieve this goal, so that there's that we have. I'm just wondering about the outreach capacity.
Sure.
For letting people know that
Yep.
wind electricity is an option.
Yeah. We haven't thought about concrete tactical steps yet, but it's in our charge from council, and it's a responsibility that we warmly embrace. I think that's a part of a good EAC's job, is to be in constant communication with the community, to hear concerns, share information. And so I think that's a kind of messaging and community engagement we're poised to do.
Do you have the capacity to do that?
I think it scales. So I think we can do some. I think we're limited in our capacity with our 3 bodies and potentially the other agenda items we have. So I would mark that as an area where it's about priority setting.
Okay.
So to be able to do that and other things that are asked of us, we might need more horsepower.
Okay. I don't have any other questions at the moment. Questions?
I do, actually. Well, thank you for bringing this to us. And when we started investigating the plastics, we found all this archival data that demonstrated a commitment to the borough to do this. And we really, if you all remember, I mean, it's everybody in this room that helped sift through that stuff. There was a lot of commitment with little discoverable follow-through. So I think we should sign this resolution. However, I think with that, there has got to be a reality of these are the action steps. So I appreciate you saying in parallel, but even before that, there is some low-hanging fruit that you refer to that we have got to have start dates on when we're going to do this. It can't just be a warm and fuzzy resolution at this point. And I think an example of that is the light presentation. And that was a fabulous presentation that demonstrated that we could not only do the right thing for the environment, but it demonstrated fiscal responsibility in the community. And I hear you saying things like that. So the other is I would love to consult with Ed. Not to put you on the spot here, but you have the holistic perspective from the staff and the council of what do our machines look like? What would it take to transfer this information? I'm sorry, I have a couple of follow-up questions because we did learn, for example, when Veronica Harris came, I mean, she did not share with us publicly Narberth's recycling data because it is considerably lower than Lower Merion in the county. And we had all this education and then we kind of lost some steam on some public outreach and education. And now that we do have Ed and the Director of Public Works and an EAC, I'm wondering if we can start with, is there a commitment of even some funds from council to reappropriate to the EAC or the Civic Association to really invest in some public outreach? So we're talking about fossil fuels, but we still have 50% of NARBs that aren't recycling or recycling correctly. That's something we can start. Some now.
That would be great.
I'm assuming. And then if there is some time at the end, I'd love to update on the plastics ordinance, largely because everybody in the room was responsible for making it happen, and there are some updates. If there's time.
We'll add that to our agenda for just prior to action items for Borough Council.
Sure.
I don't know a lot about this program. I think that one thing, to your point, Cindy, that one of the big flaws in the mayor's climate resolution was sort of glaringly obvious. It was a nice commitment, but it was a commitment to reduce carbon output, which meant you needed to have the capacity to actually inventory and measure and calculate carbon output. I mean, it was just more than a small borough could do, realistically. This is a much more straightforward set of goals. It's just, it's very easy to see, is your energy source renewable or not? It's binary. So it's I think that has a lot of benefit. These are more reachable goals. They can be done with commitment. I have a question about the idea of low-hanging fruit and the initial low-hanging fruit, some of it being financially net gain to the borough. Is part of this program to sort of create a sub-financial tracking system so that those gains don't get sort of gobbled up into the general budget, but at least get tracked separately so that they can be, at least in theory, say, hey, you know what, we could make a decision to tap into these gains in the early stages to finance more challenging projects in the later stages. Is that a part of, is there support for that within the Ready for 100 program?
I think the budgeting systems are up to individual municipal governments, but certainly that strategy is one that institutions and governments take. So
there's a model for that.
Green revolving funds or...
Okay, there's a name for it even. Great,
yeah,
thank you.
there are software systems that will do this. You might have heard of ICLEI, and I forget what it stands for.
Yeah.
International Communities or something.
Yeah.
I just want to pop in here for a second. It's a very interesting idea, Michelle, that I think we just ought to discuss just theoretically for a second. Are you saying that, say, when we were presented with the idea of changing the lights from LED to LED, right? We saw in the spreadsheet that there was a savings of approximately like $750,000 over 10 years.
Right, not just a savings.
After we paid the transition costs, it was like a net savings, right? So you're saying like that
a return.
There's a potential then to create a policy that would say, like, if we're going to save $750,000, we reinvest that $750,000 into future initiatives.
Get invested back into the program, not put into our general fund. I mean, that's a potential way to manage this
And
into
so
the future. I
invested
think.
into the program, so just have to kind of think through what kind of investments we would make.
Indeed.
Yeah, and it also, just to Cindy's point about, the idea of budgeting or allocating funds to resource the EAC or to resource this initiative in some way. Like, again, theoretically, that sounds like kind of a good idea to me, but I think it's like, it's in the details of like, sort of what would you actually do with those funds? And I think before the funds, we'd need an outline of what
The communications
initiative would
plan.
be. Yeah, some kind of.
Absolutely. And we don't even know, so knowing that we have the opportunity to propose such a thing is a good first step.
Okay.
You know, communicating electronically is generally free, but, printing stickers or pamphlets or whatever is, then you start to add costs.
Okay. And then, yeah, let's just have another round. If there's more to say, please.
And
Were
Veronica
you
Harris.
finished with your questions? You were, okay, good.
And Veronica Harris did provide with us some, and we talked about this, where you put kind of some cheat sheets on recycling. Why it sounds like you're defeating the purpose by printing materials to save materials. We had talked about going around and doing almost like individual trash audits.
The
So-
oops tags.
The oops tags, right. So there actually are some really inexpensive, low-hanging fruit.
Right. Absolutely.
Shame tags.
Shame.
Tags of shame. I would,
Wish
Friendly
like-
neighbor
wish
tag.
I would get one every day.
I'm very
So
guilty of
terrible.
wish cycling. Sometimes I've really tried to get better about that.
Well, tis the season to
Never too late.
to follow up on some of those initiatives.
Yeah.
So that sounds like you've said a little bit about the commitment to 100%, and it sounds like our neighbors in municipalities all surrounding us, many of them have adopted this commitment as well. It almost sounds to me like something we were going to do anyway, or at least I was hoping we were intending to do anyway.
It's in the comprehensive plan, actually.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
without saying this program, I mean, the goals
Yeah.
are built in.
So that makes it very simple to entertain.
Yeah.
So thank you for that.
Sure.
Because you've actually, like, I just so that everyone knows, the EAC's actually put together the draft language for a resolution.
Credit to community members who provided that to us.
Okay.
Yes.
Do you want to call out anyone specifically? So Jesse's, let the
Waving at Mary.
Let the record show that Jesse's waving to Miriam Shankow and Fred Bush and Rob McGreevy and not Jim Spear, who's actually behind the camera for the Ann Arbor Civic Association filming this for Facebook Live. Okay, next you said that that the EAC had begun to think through priorities. You'd met with staff. You'd reviewed the comp plan. You were interested in input on what to do next and how those things might be organized.
Sure. And as a transitional point, it sort of builds on the resolution, but also moves into this. I'm a member of Lower Merion Sustainability Steering Committee now, which is a subgroup of their EAC, and they are developing essentially a climate action plan. And we have negotiated with them the possibility of doing a joint planning exercise between the borough and Lower Merion, since so many of our systems are intertwined. Our communications, same school district, like we're going to be reaching out to the same pools of people, and so having common messaging. Their sustainability strategic planning process has many of the same goals that we just discussed, so transitioning all of the township residents to renewable energy and that sort of thing. So there's potentially a synergy here, as there may be with various of these items. I think that offers us scale potentially, as well as expertise, and also, just so that you know, warm fuzzy feelings between the township and the borough.
And how long has the township been doing? How long have they had an EAC? Do you know?
I don't know how long the EAC has been there. It seems fairly well established. The Sustainability Steering Committee under it is new. In fact, I don't think it's official yet. I think the resolution creating it is still going before the Board of Commissioners.
So you're saying we really have the support of our neighbors who surround us?
Yep, and they want, yeah. So all of our neighboring communities want to do this work. It is, it's social change. It's, it's changing attitudes, behaviors, and structures of the whole region. So we're not doing this alone.
Okay.
So let me share. You might have versions of this. Yeah. So this grid is really, it's an unordered list of just things we heard from staff, from residents, from ourselves, reading into our charge. And so I put these various potential EAC projects under 5 main headings, one of which we just covered in some depth, climate action and energy. And so there are many sub-projects that could fit under that would all be part of a climate action plan if we were to do that. Stormwater is something we know that the borough needs to be paying attention to with our MS4. Waste stream and diversion we also just talked about, so recycling, maybe organic separation in the future. General community and environmental health. We've heard from lots of residents who are just concerned about sort of quality of life issues and health quality issues. How is our water? How is our air? Do we have lead paint issues? Are we using too many pesticides? Questions like that. And then a whole set of governance questions. That's a broad category, but just a signal that the EAC needs to be responsive to other bodies in the borough who might ask for advice on things, charge us with special projects. We might be proposing resolutions like we just did, so we want to be integrated into the township governing structures. So that's sort of how we're conceiving our work at this point, but it's a lot for 3 people. So we can't do this all at once. This is maybe a lifetime's worth of work. So we would welcome a conversation, and I don't expect we would reach answers today, but to know where do we start? Does the borough, does council have particularly its own priorities where we can be synergistic? Are there issues here that are not part of council's agenda but are very important and the council would like to see us working on separately to the side? You'll see them either on the back or on the bottom, depending on which one one of these is smaller. I just transposed the themes from the comprehensive plan just to remind us that these ideas are also appearing in our Northern 2040 plan.
Can you interject a quick question? Because
Sure.
I've heard you allude a couple times now to sort of this idea like, we need to be mindful our resources on this commission are limited. Is that, do you think, is that a function part of the size or just of time? In other words, now you've been chairing this
Yeah.
committee for a while. Sometimes a committee or commission that's too big is that's very unhelpful, it's less efficient.
Right.
But are you at an optimal size? Is there any conversation to be had about expanding the EAC? Just because a couple
Sure.
things I've heard sounded like maybe we need more support. I
Sure.
don't know.
So in talking with my fellow council members in our first 3 meetings, we felt like we needed to have this conversation first to know how much you wanted us to do.
Okay.
So with 3 people, we can certainly do work. And I agree, there's an organizational sweet spot.
Right.
21 members would not be helpful.
No,
right.
But maybe 5 would,
Yeah.
right?
All right.
Or 7. That, as we look at these projects, I could imagine, as I think about how this could actually be accomplished, we would want like a stormwater working group.
Sure.
And maybe each one of these topics is a dedicated working group that might span more than the EAC, but might have EAC leadership or participation, might pull in people from volunteers or council members, whoever is needed to be at the table, staff. But I don't think 3 EAC bodies can cover this span.
Okay. So it's 8:35 now,
Thank you for that.
and I'm
check.
aware that you have limited time to be with us, and you have created, with the help of your commission and I guess a lot of participation from the public, because I know that I was at one meeting where there were over 50 people in the room.
Yeah, that was
which
great.
is an incredible demonstration by our neighbors of interest in what you're doing. This is an extraordinary matrix of possibilities and a lot to absorb. And so I'm not sure that we can have a meaningful conversation in the next 3 minutes about this. I would like to invite members of the public who might be listening, and perhaps you can get the word out that to provide input. And the council, our committee will think on this. We'll bring some questions to the council at large about this and let them know what's happening here. We will raise the question of commission size, and I think, and then we'll have a follow-up with you.
One practical logistical question. Right now, is there a place where members of the public who are listening to Bob and saying, oh, that sounds interesting, can go to access this kind of sort of, static resource that, or links to Ready for 100 or other work of the AEC? Is there a place,
On our
place to
webpage?
go and look at that? I think that might be helpful. I know a lot of times
Yeah.
now we do everything through social media, but sometimes
No.
there are things that
Yeah, not
require
a Facebook,
exploration
not a
of thought.
Facebook
and-
link, but
yeah.
something.
Yeah.
Is
So,
this linked
yeah,
somewhere?
our agendas are up on the borough website, and I've linked from I actually have to check to make sure that the version of our agenda that's on the website is clickable. But all of these documents are linked to our
Okay, they are
agendas.
great. Okay, that's great. Thank you.
And I wonder if we'll find out if it's searchable through the search box on the borough website as
Yeah.
well. If you type in EAC, maybe they come to the.
I'd be happy to, so I have all of these documents on a Google Drive, and so if whatever the easiest way to make these available to the public, I'd be happy to do so.
Yeah, I think that would be helpful.
I was gonna ask for a copy of this too, so I'm glad to know. I don't find our webpage, sorry,
So-
Sean, particularly helpful.
Okay.
So Jesse's got limited time, just keeping it under 30 seconds. Anything else to
No,
add?
that's it. Thank you.
Anything else to add?
No.
Okay. Jesse, thank you so much for your time.
Thank
I really
you.
Thank
appreciate
you all
it.
for your time. Appreciate it.
Yeah,
Thanks for taking an interest in our work.
This is
terrific.
incredible.
This is really wonderful.
Really, really
So
helpful.
very-
Okay, so moving on.
Because there's nothing on the website that says
So we've completed our discussion with VAC Chair Jesse Lytle. The next item on the agenda is the Windsor Avenue evaluation and the discussion of the workshop. I believe Mr. Metric wants to update us.
I'm sorry.
Do you want to update us on the Windsor Avenue evaluation?
Oh, just a signpost for you all to note that on April 3rd, John Urich and his team will be here. They'll have results of the public meeting we had in February, and they'll be presenting some choices for council to consider and build some consensus around for them to take next steps. If, for instance, council were to decide on a solution that affected traffic patterns, then the next step would likely be to do a study to find out how those changes would impact traffic patterns on neighboring streets. If council chose an option that was status quo, we don't have to do a traffic study because it's there, so we don't have to spend that money. So there's a fork in the road coming up. Actually, it's not a fork. There's probably 3 or 4 choices and a conversation to be had about what we want to do next and what guidance we want to give the team next. And assuming we give them guidance on something that requires extra work, they're going to go away for a little while and come back then with plan ideas, either publicly or with council. We haven't decided on the methodology of that next step yet. They're coming on the 3rd.
That's the workshop on the 3rd. Do you have a sense of how these options are presented? Are they sort of breaking it down into big categories of choices?
Yeah, the vocabulary will be centered around the cross sections that persons voted on, commented on, had conversations about, and what locations in the corridor those cross sections make the most sense.
Will we have any advance information before we are in that discussion and that decision on the 3rd?
Yeah, but I do think you're going to have to reserve judgment for the conversation.
Sure,
Yeah,
sure.
because I think that conversation is going to be that's the important thing that has to happen.
Are we going to be expected by John Urich to make a decision that evening, or is this something the council will be able to sleep on and then come back to?
I think we can decide whether we need to make
Well,
a
I'm
decision.
just, well, we can decide that. I'm just, there's also the consultants have a design for how they are moving the project forward, so I want to get information about what the design is. So, or what the expectation is on their part, because we've got to have agreement about, we need mutual agreement.
Mm.
And so it's nice to know what the expectation of the consultants is.
Okay,
Do you know what it is?
not yet.
Okay.
But this is, I think, an example where I would like the EAC to look at this plan
Yeah.
and advise me, as I make my decision or voice my opinion as a council, it would be really helpful for our EAC to look at it and
Well, let's be sure that we invite them to the room on the 3rd.
Mhm.
That's a good point. But so that we're streamlining the sharing of the information. We don't then require the consultant to come back again, and, So we'll make sure we get the word out to the EAC specifically that we'd like them to attend. And
review it.
Mhm.
Sure.
Anything else, Sean?
Not on that matter.
Okay. Any red flags with that? No? Okay. The next item on the agenda is the capital plan for 1920. And I guess I want to just say this more explicitly in case people are listening, they don't understand. Our capital planned fiscal year runs July 1st to July 1st, is that
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
So this is, while we discussed borough budgeting, is a January 1st to January 1st idea. The capital plan budgeting runs July 1st to July 1st.
Correct.
So we're now in kind of in the planning season for the fiscal capital plan year.
Yeah, we're just getting started, and I wanted to bring it up in this committee because since this committee meets typically a few days after a business meeting, by the time we get together in the business meeting, go through our next cycle of meetings, we will be talking about this in more detail, and there'll be more information developed at that time, giving you a time frame of setting expectations about when decisions have to be made by and what things committees are going to have to talk about in April, in May, and June, with the hope of a June business meeting adoption of the new capital plan. Last year we did it in July. It's fine.
But we want to, you'd like to see the council be ready to adopt a final plan by June.
That's my hope.
Yeah, so we're beginning now. This is the end of March, but in some ways this is even though we're meeting now on the 22nd of March, this is our April meeting.
Kind of.
In a way.
Yes.
So we really only have 2 more meetings. We have now and the next meeting to kind of get on board with this
Yeah, and I
for
think
adoption by June.
the first step
So
is
we-
going to be we're going to look backwards. We're going to look backwards at the amendments we made, the dollars we've spent, the projects that were authorized, the things that got accomplished, the things that are in process, the things that we're starting in the short term, and also have a conversation about our financing options for funding some of those projects. The biggest item being the roof at 201 Sabine. We haven't gone out for that. That's going to be an action the council will have to take. And then we can start talking about priorities and planning for the next turn around the circle.
Okay.
The things that we'll authorize in the 1920 fiscal year.
Okay. Do you want to take us through any of the specifics now?
I don't have specifics yet,
Okay.
so yeah.
Will you be providing them to us so we can give some thought to it before we meet in April?
Yeah.
Can you say a little something about sort of what we're going to be looking at when we do first? What's the first thing we'll be looking at? Is it a list of projects and
It'll
dollar
be what I-
values, estimated dollar values, and is there a goal about what our budget will be in 19 to 20?
I think
What can you say about it? Yeah.
The first step will just be to assess where we're at in that moment, what we've accomplished, what's in process, and what's coming that was authorized in the 18-19 cycle.
Okay.
Because there's been some activity. You know, we bought a fire engine.
Mhm.
It's in the garage. It's working. Having trouble getting the title squared away, but you know, that was nearly half of all of our authorized spending on that one item. And there's some improvements taking place in this have taken place and are taking place in this building, planned for the parks as well. So I just want to have a moment to collect my thoughts and present that.
Okay, great. Any questions?
I do.
Go for
And
it.
if it's not the right time,
Just
we can shift it.
take the time you need.
So you mentioned the roof on Sabine.
Mm-hmm.
So we're gonna have to have a decision about capital improvement plans by June.
For fiscal year 1920.
Correct. I guess I still don't have enough information on the Sabine property to continue what dollars we're going to invest in that. And we did have an email from Maureen O'Leary this morning, actually, where she ran some, I didn't get a chance to read it. I saw what she sent, but I didn't have an opportunity to open up and
I
read that.
asked her to come and share it at the public comment, and I told her that if she didn't appear, that we would review it publicly. So I was going to hold that for public comment, but I don't see. I think so. We can do that.
Okay.
Oh, Fred's
For
ready
sure.
to discuss during
Okay.
public comment. So that's fine. But stay with
Yeah,
the
the
prior.
broader.
Stay with your prior point.
Sure. I guess the broader, aside from that email, is still not understanding the future and the investment of that block, not the building, but that Sabine block. Yeah, the site. I certainly don't feel prepared next month to make any decisions that would direct our fiscal spending for 1920.
Well,
We already
so at the
budgeted.
council workshop on May 6th, we talked about this, and we gave our report and kind of the consensus of this committee to the council. And my understanding from Aaron is that the council had sort of green lighted the idea of getting the RFP done. And I guess that's something that we could begin to talk about. How does that get done? And, is it something, Sean, that you had a chance, you may not have had time to think about it yet, but is there, I think we're kind of looking for a solution to how to resolve this kind of catch that we find ourselves in. I think it's hard to, as a council person, as a member of the community, it's really hard to make sense of appropriating funds when we don't know what the broader context is. And so we're kind of, I think we're all feeling that concern that we might be sort of throwing good money after bad. And, you know, and particularly like in light of, and I think we talked about this when you first presented the capital plan to us, and we saw the total dollar value for the building over 4 years, over like 3 years, I guess, and you know, it was discussed in property committee meetings, and but we never. I think I'm not speaking for the whole group, but my sense of the group is that we don't have enough options to entertain large, like broader options, and so being asked to make sort of specific decisions, specific spending decisions has like gotten kind of difficult.
I think what's coming with the roof RFP is something we've already authorized in the last cycle of capital plans. We're not asking council to make any new appropriations.
I know that, I believe a lot of council, and I can't speak for every council member, but it's my sense that there's a lot of second thinking going on, that we're second guessing the wisdom of that decision.
Okay.
And so in order to have, and you know, part of that is, we have neighbors, and I guess maybe it wouldn't be an inappropriate time to discuss Maureen's email, but there are neighbors who are sort of saying to us, hey, we understand you're continuing to invest there. What are you doing? You know, we've seen, I guess,
So,
the document's public. Do
I
you
mean,
want
I
to
think
just
Maureen's
add to
email is
this?
great. I didn't have a chance to look at the attachments, you know. I'm not an expert, so I cannot, right, speak to whether or not, I would like Fred to speak, not that Fred's an expert either,
You
but
need to
I
contextualize
can't
what
speak
you're
to
talking about.
I can't speak to the accuracy of these numbers. I think that, no, she's not, and let me finish.
No,
She's not,
just preface what you're talking about. Nobody
Sorry.
knows what you're talking
well,
about.
you guys do. Maureen
I know, but-
O'Leary sent us an email, and I think Fred will deal
Thank
with it. Fred will discuss it in a little bit more detail, and maybe this is the time. What I want to say in general principle is, what she's tried to do is think about the effects of the known liabilities caught in the sense of costs to maintain and or improve that building, which we have because we hired an architectural firm which did a full facilities and grounds analysis borough-wide, and they've identified a lot of deferred maintenance in the building and a lot of projects, and it's a significant amount of money over the 5 to 10 year period. She's looked at the revenues that we have been generating and projected revenues, and she's done a lot of other calculations based on stated assumptions and estimates. And I think this is eye-opening, but the main point takeaway for me is that I think that we as council have discussed bringing somebody in who we know, not just, I mean, Maureen is a community member, and I thank her so much for putting her time into doing this on a, just on a concerned citizen basis. But I think that we're not going to make decisions until we've brought somebody in who we know has a background and clear expertise and professional commitment to running these numbers, that we definitely, say for sure that the assumptions that are being made are correct assumptions, that the financial assumptions are correct, et cetera. But I think that we've talked about doing that as an initial step. I know and that's part of the broader RFP that you're talking about, is to understand the costs and the opportunities and what there's multiple costs. We talk about financial costs, and that's what Maureen's email is getting to, and that's a huge piece of it. But I think we need to get somebody in who can do that in a way and give us guidance and advice. But there are also opportunity costs. We just received the 24, the cap. We just received our strategic. I can't think of the word.
Strategic plan.
No, it's not.
a
Comprehensive plan, thank you, right? And there's a lot of goals that a lot of time has gone into and a lot of community input has gone into. So now we have this document that sort of said, this is sort of the big picture of where things that the borough would like to do, the priorities for the borough. And some of those things may be tied into our capacity now with full ownership over this 3.5 acre site, our capacity to leverage that strength, right, to meet some of those goals, to serve some of those community needs that are expressed there. But if we haven't laid the groundwork through understanding the finances, through having somebody with expertise in public-private partnerships come in and say, these are some options to consider. This is how these things become real, and this is how they become feasible. Like we had the lighting people come in and say, hey, this is how a full-on LED lighting substitution becomes feasible for a borough. Let me show you. There are people who can do that for us, and I think until we've done that, we're sort of feeling around in the dark and having the same conversation over and over again. Yeah. And it's only a matter of time before more spending decisions. Yes, we did make a decision about the roof last year. It was a little painful, but this is just going to keep
I
happening.
think you're summarizing why we're not entirely settled with this decision.
Yeah.
Now, partly.
And maybe it probably sounds like I'm griping, and it probably sounds like I'm frustrated, because I think we've been having this conversation for a year.
I just want to say something. I want to reveal something. I just want to say something to put it out there so it's clear to everyone. we get a lot of letters from people. We get a lot of interest. We're talking about this particular letter because of the source and the way in which it's written and organized. But the person who wrote this letter was a school board director for 6 years. This person worked on a very large, worked at a very large scale with the school board during a time that was very difficult to manage and accomplished a lot with the school district. So the person has credibility in there.
Maureen has tremendous credibility.
That's
I'm
not telling you. I want everyone to
I hope it didn't sound like I was saying she didn't.
No, if anything, you were speaking to her concern, and I want to say, why are we speaking specifically to this concern? Why has this particular framing of the question given us pause to take up our time right now to discuss it? It's a meta conversation.
At multiple property committee meetings throughout, which are all recorded in a public record through the course of the past year, our borough manager described this as a quote-unquote existential question. So it's not like this is popping up today because of Maureen's email.
It's not.
We've all recognized that this is
well, for me,
a big deal.
For me, this was it pulled my attention back to the issue that I knew I wasn't feeling settled about.
Right.
So I'm going to read this. It says, dear, this is from Maureen O'Leary. Dear council members, in the calculations attached, I've estimated the effect of the proposed CIP for 201 Sabine on the borough's general fund. By my estimation, and the reason I'm reading this is it's not just from anybody. This is from someone who served as a school board director for 6 years and has been involved in some fairly large scale decision-making in the community, successful decision-making. By my estimating, the building repairs proposed will cost a significant increase to the borough's operating expenses. Demolishing the buildings on the property, creating green space result in a smaller increase in the borough's operating costs and have less impact on the borough's ability to borrow in the future. Based on these calculations, she questions her own assumptions, but she basically raises the question as to whether or not we've even entertained the option. Now, people need to understand, we're not having a conversation about demolishing the building right now. That's not at all what we're thinking about doing or planning to do. So don't Twitter us about that. That's not the plan here. The plan is we just simply want to have a longer term vision for what's the will of this community to do with that particular property. If it were California and we could have a referendum, I think we'd have a referendum on this issue and we'd ask the neighbors, would you like to have a playing field there? Would you like to have a school there? Would you like to keep it the way it is and restore the buildings as they are at the cost of X? But we don't actually even know what our menu of options is at this moment. And this is why I feel as though we're second guessing our appropriation of money to repair the roof and the whole ball of wax. So I just wanted to say that in response to Michelle.
Well, and just one quick comment, it's even more than what the community wants at that space. And I think the separate issue, which Maureen highlighted and was so helpful for me, is it fiscally responsible? Are we being good stewards of tax dollars to continue with this vision of maintaining the property? So it is separate. I mean, this really had me look at this, not just what the community want to see in that space as much as, is this fiscally responsible to continue to do what we are, in fact?
I think the question is it fiscally responsible? Is it also, we don't do everything here just for money. We do things because it's the kind of community we want to be in. It's a reflection of our values. It could be that what we have going there is a reflection of this community's will and the community's values. And that what the CIP shows, improving the parking lot, improving the park, retaining the buildings, restoring the buildings, continuing to be commercial property manager, that may be that fits, that suits the values of this community, and it's worth the extra, that it's worth the money that we're spending on it. It could be that's the decision that this community wants to make. So I'm just saying the status quo is an option.
Of course.
But I think we feel as though we're just going down that track without examining what other options we have.
That's clear. That's what's happening.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if there's more to discuss right now, unless unless, you offer a solution or if it, but I think we need to find a pathway to a solution on this, how we make decisions about this particular thing. And, or at least, yeah. So, more to say, or should we move on from that?
Can we ask while we're on this topic? Can we ask
I'd
if
like
Fred was prepared to speak on
Well,
it?
we've got public comment in a minute, and then
Okay.
Fred can speak, so that would be, that's
Sean, what are
fine.
your thoughts on that?
I'm sorry, I stepped out for some of the conversation to have Aaron sign this paper.
It's the same one we've been having for a
I
year.
think he's saying it's not probably not fruitful for us to discuss right now.
I don't know.
But I invited him to speak and he declined, so.
Okay, well, I'm inviting you to,
Okay.
because I really do think it's very important to have this conversation. I mean, it's fine, I
That's fine, you
can't force
can.
anyone to
You can.
speak, but it's really like, it's, so many times you've called this as an existential question, so I just
Mhm.
think that we really need to, we need to sort of look and square in the eyes and like figure out what are the steps, what are we gonna do,
Mhm.
and when. Before you know it, decisions will be made on a for a penny in, for a pound basis. Oh, well, the tail will be wagging the dog in a big way.
Mhm.
And that's just not, something we can do. This isn't like this is anything but it's a bright new shiny project. This is like, I think that you characterized it very well when you said that it's an existential issue. This is our biggest asset. We have to be responsible. We don't start the process of asking the kinds of questions that Maureen put in her email. But that's one piece of it, take a really hard look at the numbers and whether the path we're currently on, the status quo, is sustainable and makes sense. But also learning more about the other possibilities. Like you went out and you found somebody, you found this grant program for replacing our LED our lights with LEDs that one might have assumed was impossible until you have somebody who comes in who knows the field, who's got the expertise and can show you very clearly how this is feasible and how it makes sense financially. And there are people who do that with respect to public-private partnerships. They say, all right, you're a public entity, you have this asset. Here are some things that are possible to do. Here's how it makes sense. Now that you have those ideas, you go back to your community and you have your community outreach and you have that discussion about what to do. But in the absence of the information, we just, we keep having these
Yeah.
sort of big question mark.
It sounds like a question as to what do we do next?
Mm-hmm.
And I think we have a context to have those conversations about what we do next as a group and what we were talking about at the last meeting and the meeting before, the homework, what's the priority list, I'm going to use the numbers, number 1, number 3, number 5. What's important, what do we need to get done? And if it is something that's important, that's a now, that needs to get done, it has to have consensus from all of council. We have to figure out how to do it, and we have to pay for it. And if all of those things line up and work, then the gears start turning.
So I think it would be worth just spending a couple minutes on saying like the what it is we're talking about, and maybe we could just each share what we think we're talking about. And I'll begin. I think what we're talking about is a methodology by which we invite some third party in to present a plan for what they would do if they were in partnership with the borough. So this would allow, say, the school district to come to the borough and say, we'd propose a partnership with you that looks like this. Or it might allow an organization like New Horizons to say to the borough, we'd like to have a partnership with you that looks like this. Or it might allow MELP to come and say, we'd like to have a partnership with you that looks like this. So an open framework, enough of an open framework invitation that it could allow a vast number of different scenarios to emerge as options. You could even include the borough saying, here's what we think is the best option. You know, this is what this is what our capital plan is for the next 5 years. But then we are comparing these options. So that's my sense of what the it is that we're talking about.
For my it?
Yeah.
So I agree with Sean in that and I voiced this at our meeting on Wednesday, we've had these really brief, kind of unproductive conversations on, as a council, how we're going to prioritize. I think first we have to finish that process and say, what are our 3 big projects for the next year that we're going to concentrate on, right?
Or some other number.
Well, whatever.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll keep it 3 because I think that's realistic. You know,
Yeah.
identifying 10 is not all that helpful. But I'm assuming, again, not speaking for council, it's going to be parking. It can be Sabine, and perhaps it's Windsor and traffic patterns, right? So I think we first have to get that consensus of this is the 3. After, and assuming we get that consensus of the council, I think, Michelle, to your point, bringing in someone that negotiates public-private partnerships. I originally thought that was Ed Mangle, and I remember in December, before we were even sworn in, coming to that meeting as a member of the public and asking him, when you walked on that property, what did you think? You know, this would be an awesome fill in the blank. And he said, I had no idea. Now, I realize I actually asked him a question that wasn't suited for his skill set. You know, that's not what he necessarily does. I'm looking for the person that can come onto that property and say, this would be a great this, and then invite community stakeholders, but really to help us shepherd. I've never understood as a resident, and again as a council member, why we are in the business of being landlords. I think being dependent on rent is something that's not fiscally responsible, and I've never quite understood that role. I'd be very interested in having somebody come in, much like my employer does, Drexel, to say how do you perhaps develop and broker public. I don't know how to do that, and that's what I would
You
be
guys are kind of
interested in.
saying the same thing, in
A
the sense,
little different.
in the sense that one response to a very broad, open-ended request for ideas and proposals might be the school board saying, you know, we'd like to partner with you and use these for fields, or whatever. But other ones may well be from people who do exactly what you're talking about. So, you know, this is right for the kind of public-private partnership we've done, and let me tell you more about what we'd like. So, wait, hold on. So all of those things may come in. So I think the it that we're doing, if it's time to say, is actually getting to the starting line still. I think that these its are after we've gotten to the starting line. I think to get to the starting line, we need to know how to write an invitation that brings in the responses that we're talking about. And we may need to partner with somebody who's done that before to get that done. We may need to pay them. We may need to be open to simply working with people in our community who have expertise and doing it that way. I think there are 2 ways to do it. But whether we need to hire a consultant or whether we have enough expertise in-house and in the community to do that, I think the first step is, how do we phrase that invitation? What does that RFP look like? To put out a broad RFP that nonetheless, that isn't so broad that the response it gets from people who might view it as hard pass. I don't know what they want, right? This is too, right? They're not giving me anything. I'm not going to spend time trying to solve all their problems for them. Like, they need to know something. I don't know. I think that I want somebody who's done this before, who understands how broad you can put out a request that will make sense, that will get you back useful proposals, right? Like, I don't know that. I haven't done that. I don't know that anybody in this room has done that. I think the first step, I think the it we're talking about, is finding somebody who can help us do that.
Okay.
That's why.
That's well said. Thank you for that. No, that was a good nugget, and thanks both for sharing your thoughts. I think there's nothing for us to decide at this moment. We've had a good discussion about it. Let's move on to public comment and end the meeting. You want one more comment?
I'm
One more
sorry.
sentence.
I think before, the it might be for me even, is hitting a pause button. Even before that. No more conversations about envisioning, no more charging the rec board to vision, no more discussions about the parking lot. Continuing with, again, what I think I said last year is, what is the duct tape model? What do we need to do at this moment to assure that people are safe and we're meeting regulations, and then start at the start line with bringing somebody else in? But at this
I think
point.
we can do them at the same time.
But at this point, I think it's important to just say, we
But
are
yeah.
pausing. We're not going to use people's emotional energy, time, resources, fiscal resources to investigate this space until we have committed to be at the start line.
I agree with that. I guess the question is what has to happen for that to actually be a thing that happens? Because there's a sense of that's our policy. Do we need to bring this up at a workshop meeting and establish clearly that there is consensus for that? And how does that happen?
This is where we could definitely use
That's
your help
what I've
in
asked.
providing us with a solution.
That's what I've asked council, and that's what I've asked the president to provide to me, to be able to direct and manage the resources that are under my control, is exactly what you just said. What's important, what comes, for lack of a better word, first. I know everything can't be first, but there's a group
Right.
of firsts.
Yep.
Right,
And then what waits.
yeah,
And I haven't gotten that yet.
yeah. So that's what's next.
Yeah.
That's what's next. Okay, thanks, everybody. Let's go to public comment and I just want to thank you guys so much for sitting through the meeting, being here. And why don't we start here with Fred, since we, yeah.
All right.
Jim, where's Jim?
You can just come here, Fred. That way.
Oh, yeah. Coming to public comment.
Yeah.
But
That way
let's
the
just
camera
be
gets you.
aware that we're not going to have a discussion here because we have, it's 9:11
Just for
now
the
in the morning, and
Okay.
but we would welcome your comment and we'll listen carefully. Yeah.
So just to put this in context, I'm the chair of Rec Board and Maureen is the former chair of Rec Board. And this has been an issue that we've discussed in Rec Board. She wrote this letter on her own, not as part of, not this was not the Rec Board process, but it's coming out of, conversations that we've been having since I've been on Rec Board. So I just thought I'd read a little bit from our long-term plan for the Sabine Park. This was something that we produced last year, sent out to council, and we discussed it internally for a while. Sabine Park is an underutilized resource that would benefit from more facilities and the conversion of its large, mostly empty parking lot into more green space. The park needs a proper bathroom and water fountain to serve families with young children. However, we envision a larger transformation of the park and its environs, orienting it toward three main functions: an athletic field, play space, and a community center. In order to allow for the athletic field, at a minimum, the parking lot would need to be reconfigured. We also recommend the demolition of the Narberth Elementary Complex and its replacement with a community center. So that's where some of these ideas are coming from. It's from Rec Board's internal discussions. And then Maureen, started looking at the scenarios. She looked at the amount of money that was allocated for 201 Sabine under the capital plan. So she just totaled up all the money, the $4.3 million that is allocated to 201 Sabine on the capital improvement plan that was approved last year, and looked at how much it would cost the borough to borrow. And she used various assumptions which are in the letter about borrowing, and the conclusion in the letter is that, I had it here a second ago, is that the proposed plan would cost the borough more than various options involving removing the building, not having the rental income from the building, but also saving the money from the renovations. So she just was offering these options, to think about. And obviously the scenarios, she's not a professional planner, so we can't. The assumptions need to be looked at, the calculations need to be looked at, but just as a ballpark estimate. I think that's all.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Any other public comment? Miriam Schenka.
So I want to say, as a member of the public, to thank you very much for, it sounds like you're going to recommend a vote on the resolution, the Ready for 100 resolution.
We'll bring it to the workshop.
Or bringing it to the work, bringing it forward.
Yeah.
So I really appreciate that, and I just want to echo the importance of what the EAC chair, Jesse Lytle, mentioned in terms of creating a climate action plan, and to really strongly urge, I know that there are a lot of things that everybody really wants to do on the council, and there's a lot of work to be done. But I just really want to urge that the priorities be put together, the items be prioritized with climate action at the forefront. So I know we have, there's the question about the Sabine complex, there's a question about Windsor Avenue. There are these really important infrastructure projects. But it's always seems, I think, one of the things that we all realize about climate action is that it's one of the problems that we have as human beings is that it's so easy to put that on the back burner unless we have a flood in our town right now that we can clearly connect. You know what I mean? It's we have all these great ideas, and I would just really strongly urge as a member of the public that for the prioritization that you make as council, that you prioritize the climate action plan, and at the very least for the coming year, the low-hanging fruit like LED lights, potentially like the Soul Smart project, which requires time, but not much, if any, money. But to really, in weighing what the priorities should be for the next year in terms of both time and money, to put climate on the front burner, because I just think it merits it, it warrants it, and it other things often are squeakier in the immediate term, but then it gets pushed back to the next year. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Anyone else? Yeah. Okay.
I would just say it's clear our most precious asset is our staff, time. And so until, as a council, we make our priority list, we're stalled.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's an important reminder. Yeah, thank you. And just on that point, with that, actually, Shauna would really want to add, thank you. I just want to thank you very much for bearing us through this meeting, and hope that we're presenting you with some good challenges and working with us. And we will adjourn.
Can I do a plastics update though?
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you had done it with Jesse. I'm sorry. So before we adjourn, Cindy's going to do a plastics update.
PSA. So before we meet
PSA.
next month, the plastics ordinance will come in full effect April 17th. I will ask the Narberth Business Association to re-email the FAQ. I also made paper copies that I will walk to each store again, so everyone is well aware. But I just wanted to update. And it's unfortunate that Jesse and Jim aren't in the room because it really was Miriam, Fred, Rob, and the EAC that created this ordinance and shepherded this through the finish line. I have done a lousy job at collecting the other local municipalities that have called to ask how we've done this. I can't count at this point. I was averaging about 3 to 4 phone calls a week from everywhere, from the city of Pittsburgh to the Penn State region to Bucks County, to towns that I've never ever heard of in Pennsylvania. We've put together a resource packet so we can begin to just direct municipalities to do some initial kind of homework because the sustainability of those conversations on my end was very limited. Penn Environmental is doing a documentary and highlighting Narberth as a resource for other municipalities in how to move this space. And then Miriam, you can speak to this, but actually our own conservancy said, can we please use your survey tool because we would like to apply that more broadly. So just as a reminder, folks, that the feedback is thank you for taking this first step. Penn Environment said, okay, what's next? Can we talk styrofoam? So I had said, can you please let us get to April 18th? We now have an EAC that we didn't have at that time. But certainly I think that we are the community that would be open to that conversation and continuing to take the lead on that. So thank you all, because you shepherded this over the finish line. So that's all.
Super. Okay, thank you. And we are adjourned.